Anders Sorensen records his first win as the Blackhawks best the Rangers.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Do me a quick favor. Please go and hit that like button. Jump in the comment section down below to let me know your reaction to the Blackhawks putting an end to their losing skid last night. And make sure that you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, even if you're someone who regularly listens through an audio platform. Please go and quickly make the jump on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button for me. It's 100% free. Won't cost you anything and really does help me out tremendously. And last but certainly not least, got to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is FanDuel. Go and check out FanDuel.com right now to win $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Real quick, do want to apologize for getting today's episode out so late in the afternoon. I actually did wake up this morning to grind out an episode before leaving for work, but unfortunately StreamYard, which is the software service that we use here on the Locked On Podcast Network, was malfunctioning this morning, and when I went to go and listen back to the episode and watch it after recording, there was no sound. So I guess I recorded an episode this morning for absolutely no reason and wasn't able to re-record before getting off to work. So sadly, had to wait till I got home here this afternoon. But hey, what a win for the Blackhawks, putting an end to their 5-game losing skid, besting the New York Rangers 2-1 at Madison Square Garden last night, earning their first victory here in the month of December. And speaking of first, congratulations to Anders Sorensen for picking up his first win as Blackhawks interim head coach and also making some NHL history along the way, becoming the first ever Swedish-born head coach to earn a win in the NHL. Super happy for Anders and super happy for the guys in the locker room who have been through a lot here through the opening 28 games of the 2024-25 regular season, especially a pair of veterans that came through to lead the way offensively last night in Tyler Bertuzzi and Taylor Hall, both of which have been under heavy criticism for their lack of consistency here so far this season. For Hall, there have been blips. There have been moments. We saw the hat trick a couple of weeks ago, just prior to Thanksgiving against the Dallas Stars, but they had just been too few and far between. And for Bertuzzi, the lack of consistency, considering he signed on a 4-year contract at, $5.5 million this offseason for what he's getting paid, the lack of consistency, the lack of production was absolutely an issue. So great to see both of them have arguably their most impactful performances of the season. Yeah, I know Taylor Hall had a hat trick against Dallas, but the way that he was playing last night, in my opinion, he was the Blackhawks' best forward on the ice in a great all-around play to get the Blackhawks on the board as he forces a turnover behind the Rangers net and then feeds Tyler Bertuzzi for his 6th goal of the season to put the Blackhawks ahead 1-0. By the way, 17th time in 28 games this season, the Blackhawks have been the team to score first. Hall also wound up with the game-winning goal in this game, his 6th goal of the season on kind of a fortuitous break on a 2-on-1 rush with Connor Bedard. I actually don't believe Halsey ever shot the puck, but still managed to trickle past Igor Shesterkin, winds up being the GWG. Big-time performance out of Taylor Hall, and not only just the goal that Tyler Bertuzzi scored last night, but felt like every time that Blackhawks second line of Hall, Donato, and Bertuzzi were out there, something good was happening. Undoubtedly the best trio last night for the Blackhawks. Bertuzzi was a bat out of hell every time out there on the forecheck, doing a lot of good stuff in the dirty areas, in the Rangers crease, aka his office. Need to see him finding more success in those areas. Also led the Blackhawks with 5 shots on goal. Need to get more performances out of those two guys like we got last night. And some of you may remember I mentioned in my episode that I dropped last week recapping Luke Richardson being fired by the way. Go and check out that episode if you haven't done so already. I mentioned, though, that the veteran forwards whose lack of production has really put this Blackhawks offense in a tough place, like Taylor Hall, like Tyler Bertuzzi, Philip Kurashev, and Teuvo Teravainen are part of that group as well. But I mentioned, whether right or wrong, I'm sure those guys probably bear some weight and feel some responsibility for Luke Richardson now being out of a job. So I mentioned I wouldn't be surprised for them to kind of turn their game faces on and get right here over these next stretch of games. That's exactly what we got out of Taylor Hall and Tyler Bertuzzi last night to lead the way offensively. But I'll tell you what, this win wouldn't have been possible had Arvid Soderblom not been a brick wall in between the pipes once again, especially in the opening 20 minutes. I think that's when the Rangers certainly came with their best push of the game. They registered 15 shots on goal in the first period alone. Arvid Soderblom was nearly perfect in the opening 20 as the only goal the Rangers scored in that period and in this game came on a 3-on-1 shorthanded rush in the final minute. Unfortunately, Soderblom, not much that he could do there, just gave a little bit too big of a rebound. But other than that, flawless on the night, winds up stopping 29 of the 30 shots that he faced to pick up just his second win of the season. But I'll tell you what, if Arvid Soderblom was in a different situation, he easily could have 5 or 6 wins under his belt this year, because taking a little bit of a deeper dive into his numbers, in 8 starts this season, Arvid Soderblom has allowed 2 goals or fewer in 5 of them. And out of those 3 games in which he's given up 3 goals, he's never given up 4. So has made leaps and bounds compared to the last couple of years when we had seen him on the NHL scene. And hey, he's going to need to keep it up as the Blackhawks going to be leaning on him heavily with Peter Mrazek out for 1 to 2 weeks due to a left groin injury. But the number one difference in this game for the Blackhawks last night in terms of what went right was the mentality in the second half of the game. And the biggest narrative around this Blackhawks squad so far this year, and a big reason why Luke Richardson got fired, was because of how lackluster they were in third periods. In 27 of the 28 games the Blackhawks have played this year, they've either had the lead, been tied, or been down only 1 goal going into the third period. In 27 of 28 games, they've been in that situation. But what's killed them is not being good enough in the third period. And more so than that, sitting back and just kind of letting the game be in balance, not being the ones to go and snatch it and go and grab the victory. But that was the mentality the Blackhawks had last night. They were the aggressors, and they were the ones, for once, who are pushing the pace in the latter stages of the game. Here are the numbers in the final 40 minutes in all situations. The Blackhawks led the Rangers 41-31 in shot attempts, 23-16 in shots on goal, 19-10 in scoring chances, 12-2 in high danger chances. Not only is it noteworthy that the Blackhawks had 12 high danger chances in the final 2 periods, but the fact that they only gave up 2 to the New York Rangers when they were the team that was in the lead in the third period. I mean, night and day difference to what we've seen through the opening 27 games. And it was awesome to watch. To see this team be aggressive down the stretch and not just kind of be hesitant, sit back in the defensive zone and wait for the time to run out. No, they were the ones leading the charge, and it was awesome. And I think Connor Bedard's quote in his media availability media availability after the game perfectly describes the mentality. He said, quote, "We are at our best when we're pushing the pace and getting on it, especially with the lead. You don't want to sit back and just watch them and try to not get scored on. You want to go and attack." And I know some people hear that and probably think it's a little bit of a jab at Luke Richardson, but quite honestly, it's just plain and simple, black and white, the truth of the matter. And the Blackhawks had not been going out there with that mentality, had not been going out there and playing with that style when the game was on the line. And I don't think it's a surprise that so many final results ended up going against them. And now that they're the ones kind of leading the dance, they wind up snapping their 5-game losing streak and picking up Anders Sorensen's first win in just his second game as interim head coach. And another huge difference with Anders Sorensen behind the bench in just 2 games is the aggressiveness out of the defenders. And quite honestly, just the aggressiveness out of this Blackhawks team as a whole. It feels like they're the hunters now with Sorensen being the new head coach. The amount of times where defensemen jumped into the play, were involved in the cycle in the offensive zone, below the dot, just being involved last night, it was so noticeable. Connor Murphy, who's like the epitome of a stay-at-home defensive defenseman, even though he's on track for career best numbers offensively this year, even seeing him chip in and be involved in the offensive zone, making plays below the goal line. He drew a penalty that way last night. Also had two shots on goal and a beautiful high danger scoring opportunity that unfortunately he sailed the puck high over Igor Shesterkin, but just seeing him being involved. Alec Martinez scoring his first goal on last week against the Winnipeg Jets on Saturday in Anders Sorensen's debut, right? Like, these are defensive-minded guys who are now chipping in and helping offensively. And then Wyatt Kaiser, Kevin Korchinski, the two most gifted skaters on the back end right now for the Blackhawks, who I will talk more about here in segment 2. I thought they both did a good job of being involved in the offensive rush last night. It was awesome to see, and the Blackhawks have desperately needed that out of their blue liners to help this offense. And I think even on the flip side, the forecheckers have been more aggressive for the Blackhawks. It feels like they've been forcing a lot of turnovers in the opponent's defensive zone. Taylor Hall, a good example on the Blackhawks' opening goal of the game. I thought Bertuzzi, as I referenced earlier, was super aggressive every time out there on the ice, and this is a style of play I can get used to watching this Blackhawks team play with. Last thing I wanted to mention is the penalty kill continues to be a huge strength for this Blackhawks squad. Dating back to November 19th against the Anaheim Ducks, the Blackhawks are 24 for 26 while shorthanded over their past 10 games and have not allowed a power play goal through their opening 5 games here in December. So the special teams continues to be strong for this Blackhawks bunch. It feels like they have a new style of play that can bode well for them late in games. And listen, it doesn't need to be a massive change to get this Blackhawks team going in the right direction. As I just referenced, in 27 of their 28 games this year, they've been either within one goal, had the lead, or been tied going into the third period, right? Like, this team is still competitive. They just need a little help getting across the finish line with the lead. And I think Anders Sorensen and his mentality and his style is going to lead to some better results because of the Blackhawks' new mentality in the latter stages of the game. But there are my main takeaways from Anders Sorensen picking up his first win as the Blackhawks interim coach. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll talk about the noticeable development that's happening on the Blackhawks blue line. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And Prize Picks is now the easiest and most exciting way for you to play daily fantasy sports, because all you have to do is simply pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Do you think Connor Bedard will score more than 0.5 goals when the Blackhawks take on the Islanders on Thursday? Or how about the total between these two low-scoring teams to go over 5.5 goals? You and your crew can now win real money this hockey season when you run your game with Prize Picks. And one thing I really do enjoy about Prize Picks is it's the only real daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups still stay in play even if a player were to get injured. So go and download the Prize Picks app and use the code LOCKEDONNHL right now in all caps to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app and use the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get a free $50 when you put $5 down. Prize Picks, run your game. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a daily fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey down in the description, or simply search on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2, where I wanted to steer this conversation next on today's episode, is about the noticeable defenseman that's been going on with the Blackhawks. Defenseman prospects down in Rockford, especially under the leadership of Anders Sorensen, who of course is now the interim head coach of the Blackhawks. And I think it's noteworthy what's been going on these last couple of years. First, to kind of explain how I want to go about this, let's start with Alex Vlasic, who was part of the 2019 Blackhawks draft class, 43rd overall selection, second round pick. And I remember exactly where I was when Alex Vlasic got selected. And no, I promise I'm not being that guy who, just because Alex Vlasic is a good player now, I'm going to act like I was in on him early. No, I promise, and I have receipts. I was ecstatic when the Blackhawks selected Alex Vlasic in the second round. I remember I was still in college, home for the summer, pumped, fist pumping around my house. Really excited, and I still didn't envision that he would be this good of a player immediately onto the NHL scene. Anyways, Vlasic, of course, part of the 2019 Blackhawks draft class, goes and plays 3 years with Boston University, and then after the conclusion of his junior year, we see him jump onto the NHL scene for a late season first stint, and he winds up playing 15 games with the Blackhawks, where some of you may remember he was getting better game in and game out, getting more confident in his abilities, and by the final 3 to 4 games there, Vlasic was playing 18 to 20 minutes, handling his own, getting better with each passing game. And I think it kind of, seeing that quick success that he found, not that he was thriving or anything, but just the fact that he was able to handle his own right out of college, I think naturally a lot of us Blackhawks fans, especially when the blue line prospect pool wasn't as deep as it is now, were like, hey, Alex Vlasic, this guy might be part of the NHL group already next year. And then he winds up only playing in 6 NHL games with the Blackhawks, spends most of the year developing down at the AHL level with Rockford, playing 56 games there. But when he comes back to the NHL level next year, yeah, he still has that defensive-minded forte, and I knew that was always going to be his bread and butter, the best part of his game, the defensive side of things, with his big body, his long reach, real good at recognizing how to separate players from the puck. I always knew that was going to be his forte. But the Blackhawks did a phenomenal job of developing his puck game in that 1 year spent with the Rockford IceHawks, because last year we saw it in spurts. We saw moments where it's like, oh my gosh, Alex Vlasic might be more capable offensively than I had ever imagined. And I think a growing skating ability has also kind of led into that. I think Alex Vlasic is a much better skater than I ever envisioned, but Rockford did a magnificent job of developing his puck-moving game by putting him in a lot of power play opportunities. And I remember looking at that and being like, Alex Vlasic, why is this guy playing on the power play? I don't ever really envision him being that style of player, and here we are just a year and a half later removed, and with Seth Jones out, Alex Vlasic is having to quarterback the Blackhawks' top power play unit, and he looks like he fits in. He's done a really good job of that, and he is the leading point scorer on the back end for the Blackhawks this year with 12 points and has scored 2 goals in his last 3 games. Now, let's transition over to Wyatt Kaiser, who was part of the 2020 Blackhawks draft class the following year after Vlasic was drafted. Kaiser was a 3rd-round pick, 81st overall, and then he went on to play 3 years of college hockey at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And just like Vlasic, after wrapping up his junior year, he signs on with the Blackhawks, inks his ELC, and winds up making a late-season first stint, plays 9 games with the Blackhawks to get a little taste of the NHL level. The following year, because of kind of how the Blackhawks were going about things, I think everyone anticipated that Kaiser, like Vlasic the year prior, was going to spend a majority of the season down in Rockford. But what changed is he had a phenomenal training camp, a phenomenal preseason, and wound up sticking around. He earned a spot out of the Blackhawks training camp and had a job on the opening night roster. Unfortunately, Kaiser wound up struggling. He did stick around for 32 games at the NHL level before ultimately being reassigned to Rockford, where he would spend the rest of the season and played in 37 AHL games during the second half. But what did they do? What did they work on down there with Wyatt Kaiser? What did he struggle with at the NHL level? The exact opposite as Alex Vlasic. Wyatt Kaiser moves the puck well. He has good wheels. He can get up ice and help the play. but he really struggles with his gap control. He struggles defensively. He struggles in front of the net. He struggles to win battles in one-on-one spots against grown men. So Rockford, it seems like they really worked on that during that stint down there, and Kaiser has come back up, and he looks like a much more confident player, looks much more structured in the defensive zone. I mean, last night was a perfect encapsulation. I don't even know if that's a word, but I think you all understand what I'm trying to say, of how far Wyatt Kaiser has come. One-on-one situation, Artemi Panarin's walking into the offensive zone. Wyatt Kaiser absolutely knocks him to the ice, forces a turnover, and then gets the puck out of harm's way by chipping it off the glass and getting it out of the D zone. And that simplified game has exactly, that's been what we've seen for a majority of the season out of Wyatt Kaiser. And because he's not producing a ton offensively, he only has 1 assist through 27 games so far this year. He's not really being talked about a ton. But I'll tell you what, Blackhawks fans, as a defensive-minded defenseman, which is Wyatt Kaiser's forte, I do think, especially with Anders Sorensen stepping in the style he likes to play, I think because of Kaiser's wheels, his offensive IQ, how he likes to jump up into the rush, he's actually going to start finding more offensive success than we've seen from him so far at the NHL level. But even though he hasn't been producing offensively, that is not a bad thing for a defensive-minded defenseman. In fact, it's kind of the opposite more times than not, because that means you're not having defensive zone blunders, you're not having huge breakdowns in your own end, you're not committing huge turnovers, and Wyatt Kaiser, who was kind of plagued by that as a rookie, has kind of eliminated that, knock on wood, from his game so far this year. And I have just been so impressed with the development of Wyatt Kaiser, especially with Seth Jones out these last couple of weeks. He's been playing like a true top 4 defenseman in the NHL already. And looking at some of the analytics for Kaiser on the season, 48% Corsi for percentage, I mean, has to be among the Blackhawks leaders in that category. Has also been on the ice for only 10 goals against at even strength in 27 games, despite, not really having a consistent defensive partner. He's played with Brody. He's played with Martinez. He played with Vlasic last night. Those two, didn't skip a beat. He's played with Seth Jones from time to time. He's been in a lot of different situations, and he's handled himself really well. Also, Blackhawks goaltenders have a 94.1 on-ice save percentage when Wyatt Kaiser is on the ice. I'm sure some of that is a little inflated by the Blackhawks goaltenders being great this year, but some of that you have to give the credit to Wyatt Kaiser as well for being in good spots and not being on the ice, giving up a ton of high-danger opportunities. And he also starts 55.2 of his faceoffs in the defensive zone. So a lot of good stuff out of Wyatt Kaiser this year. And again, I think a lot of credit goes to the Blackhawks development staff and Anders Sorensen for the job they did with Kaiser in his 37 games down in Rockford, because like Alex Vlasic, he's come up this year and looks like a completely different player. And that now takes me to 2022 7th overall pick, Kevin Korchinski, who, yes, 2 years further down the development path than Wyatt Kaiser, 3 years further down than Alex Vlasic. And he is a little bit in a different conversation because he was a top 10 selection, right? But still, the same thing is kind of going on here. We saw Kevin Korchinski at the NHL level last year as a rookie. 76 games, much different than the late season stint we saw for Kaiser and Vlasic, but ultimately the Blackhawks, we know, couldn't send Kevin Korchinski to the AHL level. That's where he would have been had they have been allowed to do that. But what's clear about Kevin Korchinski is his strength are his wheels, his skating ability, his offensive attributes, his puck movement. That style of play is always going to be what are his best qualities. So what did he have to go and work on down with the Rockford Ice Hogs, and what do you have to work on over the summer? Was getting a little bit more physically mature, like Wyatt Kaiser, handling his gap situation a little bit better, and just trying to be able to handle the rugged style of play against grown men a little bit better. And it's still going to be a process for Kevin Korchinski. The kid's still only 20 years old and won't turn 21 until the end of the season. But last night, in his season debut, getting into the Blackhawks lineup with both Seth Jones and Alec Martinez out right now, I mentioned whether the stint goes good or bad for Korchinski. I think he's going to end up back down in Rockford regardless, because it's a short-term absence for Alec Martinez on IR. But I'll tell you what, Kevin Korchinski had a marvelous game last night. And yes, it's a small sample size, But he already looks like a much more confident and different player than what we saw out of him last year as a 19-year-old, the youngest defenseman in the entire NHL. He also, like Kaiser, had a real good one-on-one defensive rush against Artemi Panarin, in which he handled his own. I also thought he did a good job of using his skating ability to jump up on into the rush. Had a real good look at scoring his first goal of the season in his first game as well, but ultimately just put together a quote-unquote unbelievable game, according to Blackhawks interim Anders Sorensen. And because of that, we're going to see Kevin Korchinski once again on Thursday against the New York Islanders. But where I'm really trying to get this to, Blackhawks fans, is based on what we've seen from Alex Vlasic, what we've seen from Wyatt Kaiser, in a very short sample size, by the way, right? Both defensemen are still very young into their NHL careers. Based on their development, and a noteworthy development in such a short period of time, I do really have high hopes that Rockford is going to get Kevin Korchinski in the right frame of mind and in the right state to go back up to the NHL level the following year and have more success. And that's what it's absolutely about. That is why Kyle Davidson wants to over-ripen his prospects. And it's no surprise to me that Kevin Korchinski looks much better. Again, I know it's only been one game, but looked much better last night than basically any of his games that we saw during his rookie season. So I'm super excited to see how Kevin Korchinski is going to continue to grow while he's up in the NHL here for however long this brief stint is going to be, and also how he's going to look after continuing to develop and marinate down at the AHL level. And I have the same excitement for Wyatt Kaiser. I have the same excitement for Alex Vlasic, and also Artem Levshinov, Ethan Del Mastro, all the other youngsters that are kind of spending time down at the AHL level right now. It's for a purpose. There is a reason. There is a method behind the madness, and the proof is in the pudding with what we've seen out of Alex Vlasic and Wyatt Kaiser, and what we hope to see out of Kevin Korchinski and a handful of other Blackhawks blue liners in years to come. But there are my thoughts on a clear-cut development happening on the back end for the Chicago Blackhawks in their organization. Coming up in just a moment, before I wrap up today's episode, I do still got to get into a beefy Blackhawks prospects update. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action in the second half of the regular season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and win $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app now gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place, so that when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can go and check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you also happen to place your bets. And it has been tough sledding for our Chicago Bears. Did not get the interim coach bump I thought they were going to get this past week against the 49ers. And hey, if you want to go and fade the Chicago Bears down the stretch of the regular season, I wouldn't blame you. Make sure to go and check out FanDuel.com if that's the case. And if you're not already signed up, go and create an account and you can win $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So never waste a hunch and go and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Segment 3, before I close things out on today's episode, forgot that I gotta go back to this bad boy. Segment 3, before I wrap things up here today, as I will be doing from here on out weekly on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast until the end of the regular season, because of where the NHL club is at, I'm going to be starting to do weekly Blackhawks prospect updates, because outside of Connor Bedard, Alex Vlasic, Lucas Reichel, Frank Nazar, and the few other hopeful puzzle pieces that are already on the NHL scene, the name of the game for the Blackhawks still is about developing these prospects. And I want to be sure to keep an eye on all of them and to make sure to keep all of you updated on how each one of these prospects are faring so far through their respective seasons, starting out in the OHL, or I guess I could just say the CHL, because oddly enough, the Blackhawks don't have a single prospect playing in the WHL or the QMJHL this year. But starting with the Brantford Bulldogs, Nick Lardis continues on with his tremendous season. Now up to 43 points on the season, good for 7th in the entire OHL. 25 goals and 18 assists, those 25 tucks. Good for second in the entire O, but somehow still not good enough to get old Nick Lardis an invite to Team Canada's World Juniors roster. Not even on the team. The kid couldn't even get an invite, even though he's one of the best junior level goal scorers in all of Canada, all in North America. Nick Lardis doesn't get an invite. Didn't sit right with me, but I hope that gives him a little bit of a chip on his shoulder and he just continues to tear it up in what's going to be his final year in the Ontario Hockey League. Would love to see him reach that 60-goal plateau. And speaking of the Brantford Bulldogs, Marek Vanacker, Blackhawks 2024 first-round pick, officially returned following a shoulder injury that forced him to miss a good chunk of the early portion of the season. Finally returned a couple of weeks ago. Took him a little bit to get on the stat sheet, but had himself a really nice weekend and is now up to 4 points through his opening 5 games, 2 goals and 2 assists, while mostly skating on Brantford's second line at the left wing spot, while Nick Lardis is on the top line at the left wing spot. Staying in the OHL, did want to be sure to give a shout out to Blackhawks 2023 fourth round pick, Alex Ferrand, who quietly has been a point per game producer for the Sudbury Wolves so far this year, as he's got 12 goals and 14 assists for 26 points in his opening 25 games, which already has him just 3 points shy of a new career best in the OHL. Is his 4th year in this league, so you would like to see him take this kind of step. And while I don't ever envision Ferrand exactly being known for his offensive abilities or being like a top 6 prospect, I do think with the noted uptick offensively, plus his size, 6'3", already about 200 pounds as a 19-year-old, I do think there is enough intrigue for the Rockford IceHogs to give him an opportunity at the AHL level next year. So shout out to Alex Ferrand for getting off to a good start this year and has been mostly involved in Sudbury's top 6. Moving on to college hockey now, got to give a huge shout out as well to Blackhawks 2024 third round pick, the 67th overall selection, same pick that Nick Lardis went in 2023. John Mustard went number 67 in 2024. He was just named the Hockey East Rookie of the Week last week, carried over his heater into this past weekend to give him Hockey East Player of the Week honors, as he's been riding a 5-game point streak and is now up to 5 goals and 7 assists for 12 points in his opening 17 collegiate games as a freshman for the Providence Friars. Love to see that out of John Mustard. I know Tage Harding, who I'm really interested in, by the way. I do wonder if the Blackhawks are going to give him an entry-level contract after the conclusion of his senior season here with Providence. Harding had himself a 4-assist game over the weekend, as well as the Friars remain a top 10 program in all of college hockey. And speaking of top 10 programs, number 1 now in the college hockey ranking is the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and Oliver Moore is starting to find his swagger, baby. Just like his freshman campaign, Moore got off to a real slow start this season, but has really picked it up as of late, and I've had numerous Blackhawks fans in my mentions, in my YouTube comments, talking about how Oliver Moore these past couple of weeks has been the best player on the ice for Minnesota. Absolutely love to hear that. Already almost back to a point per game production level with 16 points, 5 goals, and 11 assists through 18 games now. And of course, Minnesota teammate and fellow Blackhawks prospect Sam Renzel has been excellent so far on the back end for the Golden Gophers. How about this? 8 goals for Sam Renzel in 18 games so far this year. He only had 2 goals in 39 games total as a freshman. He's paired those 8 goals with 11 assists, 19 points through his opening 18 contests so far this year. Been one of the best defensemen in all of the Big Ten. And sticking on the college hockey theme, transitioning over to North Dakota, who ranks inside the top 25 still as well. Sasha Boisvert, a freshman, has been marvelous for the Fighting Sioux. Through his opening 17 games, he's now got 7 goals and 8 assists for 15 points. And this kid can absolutely fire the biscuit. Every time North Dakota is on the power play, you got to watch out for the cannon that Sasha Boisvert holds on to. Boy can absolutely shoot the puck, and showing some pretty good puck movement game. Showing some good playmaking abilities along with his goal-scoring prowess so far as a freshman. Dominic James, the captain of the University of Minnesota Duluth, has been real productive through his opening 14 games, 9 goals and 8 assists for 17 points so far in his senior season. Unfortunately, Minnesota Duluth as a team has been struggling. Fellow Blackhawks prospect Adam Guyan has been struggling as well, but Dominic James still the leading point driver for UMD here in his senior campaign. Aiden Thompson for Denver DU, no longer the number one team in all of college hockey and no longer riding a point streak throughout the season, is Aiden Thompson, as he finally had his first game without a point over the weekend for Denver, but still has 22 points, 10 goals, and 12 assists through his opening 16 contests. Good for T6 in NCAA scoring. Ryan Green in the Boston University Terriers aren't in the top 10 where everyone expects them to be, but are still ranked inside the top 25. Green hasn't really taken the leap in terms of production that I would have liked to see in his junior campaign as co-captain and as the team's top line center, but still pretty good production, 5 goals and 8 assists for 13 points through 15 games so far. And the one international prospect that I have to be sure to shout out on today's episode is the 44th overall selection in the 2023 NHL draft, Roman Kanserov, who has been electric over in the KHL so far this year. Through his opening 15 games, Kanserov now has 7 goals and 6 assists for 13 points. And there was a 2-game stretch 2 weekends ago in which he had 5 goals, nearly a point per game player as a 20-year-old in the KHL, one of the best professional leagues in the entire world. And comparing to what Kanserov had last year for Metallurg, he only had 15 points in 53 regular season games. So huge development out of him in his second full-time year over in the K. Hopefully he'll be able to keep that up and ride that momentum over until he's able to come over to North America and ink his ELC with the Blackhawks. But that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2, but be sure to check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way, you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, have a great rest of your days. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.